It's another episode of the Church Solutions podcast, and my name is Phil Thompson. This is episode number 419, I think is what it is. And it's nice to be with you today. My co-host is not with us today, Steve Lacy. He is a little bit under the weather, so I figured I can just handle this with our next guest coming up. I will introduce our guest here in just a moment. But before I do that, I want to encourage everybody that we have a webinar coming up. We always say this every week because we have a webinar every month now that we've been doing for the last year and a half, I think. Uh, and this webinar is going to be called 12 Steps to a Successful Streaming Easter Service. 12 Steps to a Successful Streaming Easter Service. We're trying to get this title longer, kind of being a joke, but we always seem to have long titles. And but we're going to cover some do's and don'ts for your streaming on Easter, and mostly do's. And we've got some tips that I think will be very helpful to you. And that webinar is going to be March 12th. So I know we're cutting a little close there. I think Easter is the end of the month, right? March 31st, I think, is Easter. Anyhow, it's the end of the month, March 30th or 31st. But we've got this webinar. It's March 12th, and you can sign up. It's free. It's about a half hour long. We'll do some Q&A, and you just go to webinar.streamingchurch.tv. Webinar.streamingchurch.tv. And while you're there, you can click on the link to look at past webinars. We've done a bunch of them. And, we're always, as always, we're here to help you and your church. We are brought to you by streamingchurch.tv, and that's who we are. So sign up for the webinar. I think you'll like it. And we'll cover some things that maybe you never thought of before, or maybe you have. So whether you're new or a pro at streaming video, hopefully we can add to the impact of your Easter service, especially streaming it online. So there you go. All right. So let me introduce our next guest here. Put my glasses on so I can read his bio. I've cut it down quite a bit because if I read the whole bio, we'd be out of time because he's done a lot. Our next guest is the author of Podcasting Church and Tweeting Church. You got to have to change that to X Church, I think, right? And he's a speaker. He's a writer. He is a podcaster himself, and he's a videographer, and he's running for president in 2024. No, he's not running for president. But if he was running, I would vote for him. Please welcome everybody to the Church Solutions podcast, Paul Alan Clifford. Paul, how are you today?
Well, I'm excited to announce my candidacy that I didn't know I was going to be doing. Apparently, we would have 3 votes. You, me, my wife. I am not too certain about my 22-year-old daughter. She could go either way. So,
Well, you got my vote if you're running, but being a little facetious here, but of all the people we interview, you're one of my favorite people. I don't know. I think it has something to do with the hair, but you're one of my favorite people. You're one of the most diverse people I know when it comes to church ministry and on the tech side of things. And I mean, you do a lot of things, and you've got a lot of experience, and you're traveling all over the place. In fact, you're going to be heading to Florida, I think, after we're done with this podcast, because you're working with training people with ProPresenter, and that's what I
mhm.
really want to talk to you about today. We don't sell equipment. Our company doesn't sell equipment. We do recommend equipment, and there's other presentation softwares out there which we can maybe mention here in a little bit. But I do want to talk to you a little more about ProPresenter. In fact, we did the webinar yesterday on equipment recommendations, and somebody asked me about ProPresenter 7, and I said, well, I've heard good things about it. I've used ProPresenter 5, but never 7, and we have a guest coming on our podcast, so listen for that. So without any more further ado, let's talk about ProPresenter. So uh, ProPresenter, well, let's start with the basics. What is ProPresenter? I'm sitting here as a pastor or even somebody that's new to tech. What do I care about ProPresenter for?
So, you've heard of PowerPoint. You've probably heard of Keynote, Google Slides. Those are all presentation software, but they're really intended for the business market. So they don't have some of the little conveniences that worship software has. So ProPresenter, Media Shout, Proclaim, uh, Presenter, which is not made by the same company as ProPresenter, ironically. Um, these are all pieces of software that have some of the little conveniences that just make showing lyrics or sermon notes or video clips, etc., so much easier for your church. And I might be a little biased, but quite frankly, I think that they're better than the others. They're better than PowerPoint. They're better than Keynote. They're better than Pages because video and background videos, things like that are not an afterthought. They're baked in. So you can do stuff that you really can't do with some of the more well-known options.
Kind of like us with streamingchurch.tv. We're made specifically for the church and for ministry. And so we have features, built in that some of these other companies do. Now, you mentioned something I thought was interesting. There's software called Presenter software, but it's not the same as ProPresenter.
No, no.
Okay. That
So ProPresenter has been around since, I think it's coming up on 25 years now. And there was another company that made software that was called something else, and I'm blanking on what it's called. And then they changed the name to just Presenter. And I jokingly call it Amateur Presenter because it's not as powerful as ProPresenter. And it seems like that's kind of an obvious mistake just from a branding standpoint. But not my company.
yeah.
I don't work for any of these companies. I work for myself and the churches that hire me. So I'm entitled to my own opinion, I suppose.
Well, again, it kind of rings a bell with me because we're streamingchurch.tv, and a number of years ago there was a company out there called YourStream that apparently took a look at us and said, we'd like to get in the church market. Let's call ourselves churchstreaming.tv. And so I get calls all the time, usually people complaining that they can't get any help. Nobody answers the phone. I'm glad you finally answered the phone after trying to call you for 2 weeks. I'm like, well, who are you? And then I find out, oh, you're not one of our customers. You're church streaming. Uh, and of course, we're streamingchurch.tv. And I'm sure they get calls as well, but they never answer their phone, allegedly. So, but yeah, so it's kind of confusing on our end, and I'm sure customers get confused all the time. So Presenter is not the same as ProPresenter. So there's other software
Right.
out there. So and what really, well, let's get into the streaming thing since we do streaming video here. ProPresenter a few years ago uh, enabled themselves to be able to stream services. So you didn't just have presenting software that you could put on the screens at the church or other things like that, but then you could actually stream with ProPresenter. And I guess it's ProPresenter 7. Is that when it started?
Yeah. So I tell people this, think of ProPresenter 7, the number 7, kind of like OS 10 for Macintosh. Like that was, for years and years, every version of their operating system was OS 10. And they recently abandoned that like 3 or 4 years ago. But before then, it was like OS 10.8, OS 10.9. Well, ProPresenter 7 is kind of like that. They're in 2020, January of 2020, they released ProPresenter 7, and since then they shifted their business model a little bit. So one advantage that they have over some of their competitors is it's not software as a service exactly, in that if you quit paying for ProPresenter, as long as you have a computer that'll run the version that you have, it'll continue to run. So there's that, but you can continue to pay like a maintenance fee, which is less than buying the software outright. It works out to like around a third of buying the software outright. And about once a quarter, they release a major update. In fact, I'm working with the beta of ProPresenter 7.16 right now, where they added 3 new features just this year. The last update was, I believe, November of last year. So they're just pumping out the new features and just making it this incredible piece of software that can do just about anything you can imagine in the presentation world.
So it runs obviously on any machine, Apple, Windows, uh, Ubuntu.
No, it doesn't do Linux, and it doesn't do like a Chromebook, but it does the 2 major ones, Windows and Mac OS. So if you've
Right.
got one of those 2, then you can run ProPresenter as long as the machine's fairly recent. I wouldn't want to try and load it up on Windows 95 or anything, but I usually tell people, the last 3 years, if you've got a new computer in the last 3 years, you can probably run ProPresenter.
Okay. So you mentioned they had 3 big updates, and let's just start there. What are these wonderful updates that ProPresenter 7 point, did you say 18? Was that what it was?
16.
16. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So
Yep,
what
yep.
are the three updates that they've done, these new wonderful features?
Well, so people in the church production world might run into this problem where someone comes and they have their iPhone and they've taken a picture on the iPhone and they send it and say, hey, we need to use this for an announcement. Maybe this was our daddy-daughter dance that we just recently had, or maybe this is from a mission trip or something like that. And so they send this picture and it's HEIC format. That's short for high efficiency image codec. Well, that was all fine and good, but up until 7.16, ProPresenter didn't support that. So you had to take the extra step, open it up in preview on your Mac and save it as a JPEG or a GIF or a GIF, depending on who you talk to, you know. And now you don't have to do that. You just get it, you drop it into ProPresenter, and that works. That's kind of that's a convenience kind of thing. It just saves you a few minutes. But going back to that, uh, someone takes a picture. Well, what if they take the picture vertically or they take video vertically and then you want to show that in church? Before, you could make it have a blurry background in the extra space, but it was a couple of extra steps. In 7.16, there is just a checkbox that says zoom and blur, and it takes the image, zooms in on it, and blurs the background just by checking that checkbox. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is ProPresenter is really powerful, and it has these actions that you can do on individual slides. Well, a few years ago, people had gotten so into doing these that they'd have, 4 or 5 actions on a slide. And so Renewed Vision added this thing called macros where you could save those 4 or 5 actions and then reuse them week in and week out. Well, with 7.16, they've added folders so you could have, they call them collections, but it's basically folders of these macros. So you could have a collection of ones that influence your lighting console. You can have a collection of the ones that you use for the youth program, etc. And you can do a lot of organizing that way. And they've also changed the ability to update the icons on those so that it's really easy to tell at a glance what it does, depending on what you've changed the color and icon to be.
Yeah. It sounds, those things you mentioned sound like they're tremendous when it comes to making it more convenient to make some changes or to, I mean, we've all worked in churches and we know that some pastors are the kings of last minute stuff, right? They walk in the door and the service is going to begin in an hour. It's like, oh, by the way, here's a picture I want to post, or here's a video I want to post, or here's something. Uh, it sounds like those kind of improvements really make the person running ProPresenter, the person running the tech stuff, makes their life much easier, it seems to me, right?
Right. Yeah. I'm given to some exaggeration. I like a little hyperbole, as they say, but this is not an exaggeration when I tell you that a former pastor at my church would sometimes have the sermon notes delivered in the song before the message. So, like,
Are
and
you sure?
then
Maybe
he
we were working for the same guy. Are you sure?
maybe, and then what's really annoying was, like, in his mind, he had a different iteration of the notes. So he'd say, "And look at this picture." And we didn't have that picture. Never seen that picture. And he hadn't given us enough time to go, okay, is this exactly what you want in the order that you want it? Just to double check. No, he had an assistant that brought it in and said, oh, yeah, it's totally right. And then it would be the middle of service and we'd be like, yeah, you just called for something that isn't there. We can't do anything about it. We can't generate this out of nothing. Yeah. So.
I'm laughing because I can relate. I'm sure there's a lot of people listening to this podcast and can relate. And there's probably some people that are guilty as charged there listening as well. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, it's tough. And look, I was a senior pastor for 8 years and executive pastor for probably 15. And uh, I mean, I know it's busy. It's a busy life when you're in ministry and there's lots of stuff going on. So we don't want to rag on these people that are last minute Louis, but or Louises, I guess, because it doesn't matter. But it seems like, yeah, with what you're saying here, can certainly help with these last second changes. Can certainly make life easier. So, all right, so let's just kind of go back up the tape here a little bit. ProPresenter 7. What are give me some of the best practices for ministries, that they can get the most out of ProPresenter?
Yeah, so one thing that I think is, like, if you're in the ProPresenter world, you probably know this, but not everyone does. And that is, you can download a version of ProPresenter for free and play around with it. So if you're thinking about, you know, we have ProPresenter 5, you mentioned, or 6, and you're thinking about upgrading, but you're not sure, you can download the free version. And the difference between the free version and the paid version is a watermark that shows up from time to time. Other than that, it's identical. So you can download it, play with it, learn it, make sure it works on your machine. You know, you'd hate to spend however much, depends on, how many services are going concurrently that you would want to spend. You'd hate to spend all that only to find out, oh, yeah, you know how Paul says if you've got a computer from the last 3 years? We thought ours was from the last 3 years. Turns out it was 8 years ago that we upgraded. Just,
Yeah,
when you get older, time flies.
I totally
So,
understand that. Yep.
yep. So, uh,
So
I
you
just
can
turned
fool
50,
around with it.
so
Yeah.
I get it.
You just turned
Yep.
50?
So that,
Oh, good for
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah, it's all downhill.
yep.
But no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I'll be 66 here in a couple of weeks. But all right, so people can play around with this thing. Um,
Right.
all right, so and again, this is not really an infomercial for ProPresenter, but this is kind of your specialty besides other things.
Hmm.
So I'm listening to this podcast. I'm a pastor or a tech guy here, and I'm thinking we've got all these different things floating around the desk in the back there where all that stuff is. If ProPresenter can stream and do some other things, I mean, how hardy is it? I mean, if I'm going to use it as a live encoder to do streaming video, and I'm also, I
Hmm.
mean, can I still use it to project stuff on the walls?
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, is this going to be okay without crashing? Is it going to drain my CPU on my computer? How hard is it to set up? Uh, Pick one of those questions and answer it.
Well, so let me start with, can you project lyrics and sermon notes and such in person and also do it online? Yes. And you can reformat the secondary screen so that it looks a little bit different. So the way most people do it in their church is they'll have full screen graphics, the words are taking up most of the screen. But online they want to have what we call a lower third. Those of us in the video production world are familiar with that. That's a graphic that is on the lower third of the screen. So what ProPresenter can do is it can have kind of an alternate version where the same words are in both places, but they're formatted slightly differently. So you could do that. In video production, we have the ability to remove backgrounds, and that's called keying. Well, ProPresenter can send out an image that's fine for a luminance key, an image that's fine for a chroma key, or an alpha channel, which is the best of all three of those, which it's not removing any particular color. It just knows based on the hardware that it's getting the information from what needs to be transparent, and you can plug that into your video switcher and it will just remove everything that's not supposed to be there. And it also does translucency, so the lower third could have a background on it that you can kind of see through a little bit. And that's something that, like, the Super Bowl was on not too long ago, and I'm watching all their graphics and everything, and I'm thinking, the stuff that they're doing here, the hardware for this is tens of thousands of dollars. With ProPresenter, I can do a lot of that same stuff for an off-the-shelf Mac or Windows machine and some fairly inexpensive software. So, it's expensive compared to, well, I got PowerPoint with the computer, but compared to the high-end video production software on purpose-built computers that these television stations are using, it's very inexpensive for how powerful it is.
I'll get to the price in a moment, but let me ask you this. Can I use it for webinars?
Yeah, I do. So yeah,
Really? So you use
yeah,
ProPresenter for webinars, and
yeah.
this is, nobody cares about this except probably me, but so you can people like participate with chat and those kind of things, or do you layer that over something else so that
Yeah,
you can?
so you can send it to Zoom, for example. You can
Mhm.
send it to other software.
Okay.
So things like Wirecast, OBS, those can all take it. Um,
Okay.
and so you can do it that way.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't do webinars itself, but it can interact with all the
Right.
other stuff. So
Yeah.
um, in addition to just a hardwired uh, video feed, over HDMI or SDI, you can also send what's called NDI, which is a virtual screen over the network. So you can send that to other software on the same computer or software on another computer, and you don't have to put in a special cable or anything. It just, if
Yeah.
they're networked together, they can talk.
Yeah, and that was what I was getting off track there with the webinar thing. I'm sure Steve's listening to this thinking, come on, you're getting way off base here. But if I have ProPresenter and I want to send something at my church and I want to send something to another room in the church, I'm able to do
Hmm.
that with ProPresenter.
Yep, absolutely.
And of
So,
course, as you just mentioned, the network at the church could do that as long as the network's healthy.
right,
Right. I
right.
mean, if you have a bad network at your church, you're fairly weak, that could overwhelm it, so
Right.
yeah. So yeah. So that's really nice because you could be doing things because there's other, there's a lobby area maybe
Hmm.
where people there's even maybe a kids area. I remember years ago, this is long before streaming was really popular, like around 2000, 2001. We would just run a cable from the camera feed at my church where I was senior pastor. And we ran it downstairs so that people could see,
Hmm.
the nursing mother's room. We had nursing mothers. We had lots of kids. And so we had nursing mothers and we had a big TV in there. People could see the service, but that was using, cable. That was using, but so you can just do that now magically using your church's internet or some other way for that matter.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what I didn't say earlier is sure you can do one screen for in person and another one for your live stream, but ProPresenter can do up to 8 screens all at the same time. So you could have a special one that is just for the nursery that is formatted somewhat differently that is better for where it's going to be.
Right.
Whereas the live stream, maybe you're thinking, well, most people are going to be watching that on a phone, so you would format it a little bit differently for, you know, a
Yeah.
screen this big as opposed to a TV in a room where there's a bunch of rocking chairs for the nursing mothers to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It sounds really interesting. So there's other software out there, other uh, presentation software out there, of course, as you mentioned at the very beginning of the podcast. Uh, and you're saying that they really don't compare to what ProPresenter has, ProPresenter
Well,
7.
let me put it this way. Any church that doesn't worry about the amount of money, so the 100 largest churches in the country, for example, I can walk into any one of those churches. You could blindfold me, just drop me off and say we're at one of the 100 top largest churches, and I would walk into their tech booth and then say, "Show me your ProPresenter," and they would have it because it's just that powerful, and it's just this. It's a wonderful thing. Um, in fact, one thing that I should say is while it was designed for the church market, when you first install it, there's a little checkbox that says, "Hey, are you in the house of worship market?" And if you say no, then it hides the Bible, it hides the CCLI stuff. Um, and the reason for all of that is because it's so good that there are a lot of secular organizations that are using it. And I can't think of any secular organization much more secular than the US House of Representatives, which is using ProPresenter.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah. They're
they're
pretty secular.
very,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, very famous stand-up comics that you would know that when they go out on tour, they're people when they're putting up graphics or video clips or whatever, they're using ProPresenter because it's just so much better than PowerPoint.
Wow.
It's a
Wow.
Ferrari.
Compared to a Ford. Okay. All right. So before you go here, a couple things I want to do. I want people to know how to get a hold of you. Also, I know you're going to be traveling and hey, people might want to come and see you. But also you mentioned, in comparison to everything, the price is reasonable. What is the price?
Hmm. So you need a license for every computer that's actually going to present to people, right? I mentioned the free version. Well, that's going to have a watermark that comes up from time to time. It's designed to be annoying because they don't want people just to use it without paying for it because the worker's worth his wages, right? So, um, for one seat, it's $400, $399, and that you can use that as long as you've got a computer that'll run it. So it's not the case that in a year, if you quit paying, that it quits working. Some of the other ones do that. You have to pay every month or it just quits working. So that's one thing to consider. But for churches and churches only, in addition to single seats, they also have a campus license. So if you're in a larger church where at the same time you've got your regular church service, you've got a youth service, you've got a children's service, maybe sometime during the week you've got a recovery service that may not be in one of those normal rooms. So while you can turn off the license in one place and turn it on in another, after about 3, it makes sense. Well, after 2, when you go to the 3rd, it makes sense to get the campus license, because the single seat is $3.99, the campus license is $9.99. So that's a really good price, and you can have up to 20 of them running at the exact same time for
Is
that $9.99.
So is there, you mentioned, is there like a maintenance thing or something, the monthly maintenance? What do you call that and what is it?
Yeah, so it's called ProPresenter Plus, and I'm trying to see what the price is of that.
Yeah.
But it's about a third of whatever your license was. So I want to say it's $130 for the single seat and like $300 for the campus license. And that gets you both support on an ongoing basis. Although, the Facebook group that I run alongside Renewed Vision, that's free, and you can ask questions all the time there, and people do. We've got over 55,000 ProPresenter users there, so we get a lot of questions about it. But if you want to reach out to support, that is included in that yearly fee, along with all the updates, which, as I say, there are major updates about 3 or 4 times a year. And I just
Right.
told you 3
Right.
released in the last 2 weeks, but there's a ton.
Yeah. So, a quick question. I'm running ProPresenter on my computer, and my computer crashes, and I have to put it on a different computer. Do I have to buy a whole nother license?
Nope, no.
Okay.
So if you're two situations. Situation number one, you foresee that your computer is about to bite the dust. You can go through, there's a little button where you can unregister. Just click on the button, unregister, you're done. Situation number two, you don't see it coming, or you saw it coming, you put it off a little too longer. It's just dead. It's not coming back. It
No
doesn't matter what
resurrection.
you
Yeah.
do.
It's not going to
No
rise from the dead.
resurrection of
Yeah.
the computer.
Right.
We've got resurrection in the bodies, but not of the computers. So there's not. If that's the case, you can reach out to support, and they'll transfer the license
Oh,
over
okay.
for you.
All right.
So
Okay. Yeah.
you just log in with
Yeah.
your regular code once they've done that, and you're good to go.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're out of time here. Paul Alan Clifford has been our guest. So Paul, one thing I love about you is you're easily accessible. You mentioned a Facebook group. You've got several Facebook groups, I think. But so how can people get a hold of you? They have questions about, and look, I've gone to you before for different questions, not just about ProPresenter, but about other things. How can people get a hold of you?
Well, I'm on Facebook, facebook.com/Paul Allen. No, I think it's Paul Clifford, actually. Let me just double check that here real quick.
I know if they Google Paul Allen Clifford, they'll find your website,
Yes.
which is Trinity. What's your website?
TrinityDigitalMedia.com
Yeah.
is my company website, but I've also got Church Tech U, short for university.com. And both of those, you can go to facebook.com/groups/ProPresenter users group, and that's that large ProPresenter group. I've got a smaller ProPresenter group as well that I haven't advertised a lot. I was a moderator there, and the owner couldn't take it over anymore, so he let me have it. So
You have it too. Yeah.
plenty of
Yeah.
places.
That's the nice thing. Today we run across this all the time because we're a streaming company, but we get people calling us all the time going, I was with this other company and nobody would talk to me. Nobody answer my phones 2 weeks before I get an email. But the nice thing about people like you is that, you can relatively get back to people relatively quickly, uh,
Hmm.
either with Facebook or those kind of things. That's one of the things I think that to me makes a big difference. Because when you're in trouble, you need help, and
Right.
it's nice to have somebody on the other end of the email or even social media will reach out and help you. Okay, so we're going to wrap up here, but you're going places. Where are you going to be the next week or two? I don't know. Tell us in case somebody
Well,
wants to stalk you or something.
yeah, yeah. So tomorrow I am hopping on a flight for a live training in the Tampa area. So we've
Yeah,
got, I
that's February
just sold the
15th,
ticket.
right? Yeah, February 15th. You're going to be in
Yep.
Tampa. Yeah. Okay. We might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead.
that's when I'm flying out. It's actually the following Saturday. So the
Okay. The
17th,
weekend.
I think is,
Okay. All right.
yep. Uh, and then after that, the very next weekend, I've got one in Western Kentucky, like about an hour north of Nashville, actually, in a little place called Bowling Green.
Oh,
And
my wife's neck of the woods. That's where my wife is from, that area.
right,
Yeah.
right. So it's actually where my college roommate lives. So
Oh,
it'll be
okay.
cool to see him.
Yeah.
And you can see everywhere that I'm going to be if you go to tdm.fyi/events24. I've just got a list of events there that
Oh, wow.
I'm going to be at, and there's a pretty good list. I'm pretty booked until mid-May, actually.
Oh, wow. You got to be in the Tucson area, Phoenix, or something like that?
I have talked to people in Arizona, but not yet.
Oh,
I do have a warm place in my heart for Arizona because my wife and I, before we got married, we were out at the Grand Canyon with
oh, yeah.
the aptly but not creatively named A Christian Ministry in the National Parks. So,
Okay. All right. Well, we're a little south of there. We're in Tucson. So, but
right.
yeah, if you get around this neck of the woods, look us up. Okay. Well, look, we're done here. As far as time goes, Alan Clifford's been our guest today. And folks, if you missed all that information driving down the road or something and you don't want to listen to it again, you can always just reach out to us at streamingchurch.tv. We have webinars coming up and all sorts of things that we do. And if you got questions about ProPresenter or you want to get a hold of Paul, just go to streamingchurch.tv and you can chat with us or leave a message there. So, Paul, always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I'm glad to talk to you too, Phil. So, looking forward to next time.
All right. Same here. And folks, thank you for spending some time with us today on the Church Solutions Podcast. Steve Lacy will probably be with us next week. I'm Phil Thompson. Please take care of yourselves and each other. We'll catch you again on another episode of the Church Solutions Podcast.